Welcome to Wetpixel Live. I'm joined today by Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey,
Alex
Adam.
is a well-known photographer. Hi, good to see you as well. And we're going to talk today about lens choices for crop sensor SLR cameras. So I'll throw it straight back to you, Alex. What's your preferred wide-angle lens choices for crop sensor cameras?
So crop sensor SLRs is a pretty easy recipe, this actually, because there's certainly, as a Nikon shooter, you can almost do everything with two lenses. And it makes it really simple. And it's a Nikon and Canon thing. It's available in both mounts, but it's the Tokina 10-17 fisheye zoom. It is the perfect lens for wide-angle underwater photography. There's no doubt about that. And for me, that's why it actually means that I think crop sensor cameras, crop sensor SLRs, actually remain. If you could only have one camera to do everything, that is the camera to get.
Yep.
So the 10-17 fisheye zoom is so good because it's close focusing and it's got phenomenal flexibility. It allows you to shoot all the way out to 180-degree corner-to-corner fisheye, and then it comes into about 100-degree. So it gives you really big flexibility, and you can basically put this lens on and cover everything. Yeah. And because you're shooting with a crop sensor SLR, you can also use it behind either a standard size sort of 180mm, 200mm dome port, or you can even use it behind a 100mm dome port and get really nice quality. And it just gives phenomenal flexibility. So that for me is such a go-to lens. It just dominates wide angle for crop sensor shooters. And although there are other options out there, it's kind of that lens and stop and you're done. You've just got everything covered in one go.
It's worth mentioning that Tokina have two versions of it, one of which has quite a short petals on it for sun protection. One has the petals and one doesn't. Practically, I don't think I've found any particular difference between them. I think the one without petals is quite hard to get outside the Japanese market, but in general, I've not found that anyone really has any particular advantage either way.
Okay. I think one thing that always causes a area of confusion, and I'm sure when we do our fisheye versus rectilinear, one of these chats get into this, is the focal length thing. And a question you get asked all the time is, how come Tokina make a 10-17 and an 11-18 or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Surely there's a massive overlap. And the thing to remember with focal lengths and angle of coverage is that although the numbers are the same, they're operating in different currencies is the best way to think about it. So fisheyes have their own currency system in the same way that, say, pounds sterling that we live in the UK and dollars, there's £100 and $100. It's not the same amount of money.
Oh.
Obviously, £200 is more than £100 and $200 is more than $100. And I think that is a good analogy for how fisheye lenses work in terms of focal length. So a 10mm lens that's a fisheye lens sees a lot wider than a 10mm non-fisheye wide-angle lens. Yeah. And so an 11 to 18mm rectilinear wide-angle is actually, at 11, is narrower than the 10-17 is at 17.
Yeah.
So, you can end up having both. So as we move into the rectilinear lenses, it's important to remember that you might actually, as a crop sensor shooter, have a 10-17 fisheye and then a 10-24mm rectilinear lens, and there's actually very little overlap in terms of field of view.
Well,
just want to make that clear.
That brings us neatly on to, I think, my preferred option in Nikon for rectilinear wide angle is definitely the 10-24. And it's a really nice sharp lens. As we discussed in the full frame version, there are some occasions when I think rectilinear wide angle is a preferable look. And the classic one here is my brain doesn't compute if there are meant to be straight lines in the picture and they're bent, which is what would happen with a fisheye. My brain doesn't like that very much, so it wants to see straight lines. So Recs are a good example of this. Obviously, Recs have straight lines on them, so generally I would tend to shoot a Rec with a rectilinear lens. And certainly, I think Canon and Nikon have a 10-24. I have no experience of the Canon 10-24.
I think the Canon is 10-22.
Sorry, 10-22.
I've seen people shooting with it, but the reality is so many crop sensor shooters just use that 10-17 the whole time. I don't remember. I can't even remember seeing pictures that I've been impressed by. I'm sure it's very nice, but you're buying these lenses because you want a different feel to your pictures to the 10-17. The 10-17 is kind of the do everything lens in this format. And if you need your 10-17 to be a little bit tighter, you can always consider using it with a Kenko 1.4 teleconverter.
Yeah.
So and that's a lot cheaper than buying a rectilinear wide angle. So that you really cover everything. And what's nice about the 1017 is when you zoom it into 17, although it has still got fisheye distortion.
Yeah.
Because it's zoomed in so much, you hardly notice that.
And it's good for big animals as a result. You don't get this kind of dreadful tadpole effect that you get with fish eyes at 17. Well, you get much less of the sort of tadpole effect where the animal's all shoulders and head and no tail. So yeah.
No, it's a really, really nice lens.
The other thing about the 1024, just about the 1024, is you also with the 1024 you're back into the problem of needing big domes. So the 1024 really needs a 9-inch, a 240mm dome, a big dome, which is a big heavy thing to carry around.
I felt it was okay with like the 8-inch 200mm dome when I tested it. You just need to be maybe a little bit careful with the apertures, but I found it was okay with that. But it's I remember when it came out though, I did a back-to-back test of it in the pool with the 12-24 Nikon, which preceded it, and the 10-24 really performed much better behind the dome port. So I would definitely recommend the 10-24 over the older 12-24 in terms of underwater performance too. I think we're getting to macro now, and as a Nikon shooter, it's relatively simple again. Because and Canon actually now have an equivalent as well, in that you've got a 60mm macro lens. The Nikon goes to 1:1, so it's a really, really nice lens. And that lens is kind of perfect as a muck diving lens, and it also works with the CMC1 wet diopter, which really transforms that lens for super macro. And it's amazing that you have this incredibly flexible lens. And I know lots of people who do muck diving trips that just put that lens on. And they're like, well, I want to get some variety, but this just does everything. And I know you use the D500 with that lens a lot, Adam.
I do, yeah.
It does everything, doesn't it?
It does, and it's really good as well. If you open up the aperture for really shallow depth of field, it's a really, really good all round lens. It focuses really closely in front of the lens, particularly with the SMC on the front of it. It's my go-to option for macro shooting with crop sensor. I actually rarely find that I'm using the 105 now.
Well, and then you still have the option with those systems to use. In Canon speak, use the 100mm macro, and in Nikon speak, the 105mm macro, both of which are very good lenses. They are good in clear water for fish photography. It's nice to have that little bit more working distance. And if you're really into your super macro of the really small stuff, having that slightly more powerful lens on the camera before you start putting the diopters on the front of it, I think also gives you real ability to get the super macro stuff in. So still worth owning. But certainly on a muck diving trip will get less use than your 60mm.
I think it's important to point out, obviously we've got people joining us with different levels of knowledge and experience, that with the crop sensor camera, the effect of the smaller sensor is that the lens has a focal length 1.5, in the case of Nikon, 1.5 times greater. So the 105mm or 100mm macro becomes equivalent to about 150mm on a full frame sensor camera. So this, obviously with the 105, you've got a great deal more magnification than you would on a full frame camera. And that's the point that Alex just made. So
But I think most people don't see that. You see what you see through the camera.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't switching. Whereas you and I maybe running workshops and things and borrowing people's cameras and testing cameras and reviewing cameras, we're switching formats a lot. A lot of people shoot one format and don't jump around too much. Yeah. I think it's also, there's a few other lenses worth mentioning, because I think crop sensor SLRs have two, in the 10-17 and the 60mm have two such dominant lenses. It's easy to say you just need those two really, and then maybe add a 105 and then maybe add a 10-24. But there are a few other option lenses if you've got all the gear and you're looking for something to give your work something slightly different. A lens I've not shot underwater, but I have tried on land, is Nikon make a 40mm macro for crop sensor only, and it's relatively cheap and it's very lightweight for travel. And it gives you the same as that a full frame shooter gets on 60mm. So it gives you a slightly wider macro lens. Could be very good for black water diving. Could be very good for some of the bigger
hairy frogfishes.
It lets you get really close in not such good visibility. And I think that can be really, really valuable for that. Gets you that slightly closer working distance, which can actually make reducing backscatter easier, and also can make doing some of the creative lighting easier when you're really, really close to the subject. It's easier to wrap your lighting around the subject and do backlighting and things. And then Nikon also make an 85mm macro lens that I have shot that lens underwater. A friend of mine had one, and I borrowed it just to do a few dives, and I was really impressed by it. It's a nice focal length. It's the same as to explain to you, Adam. It's the same as kind of 100 mil, 105 mil on a full frame camera. So it's a very nice lens, focal length, but it's sharp, but it's relatively cheap and it's relatively light. So it's a really good lens. And, you know, again, if you're looking for something to take on a trip to give you some more variation, both of those lenses would probably need different port extensions to you're using normally. So it's just something to bear in mind if you're adding those to your system.
And I think that also there's also the option of water contact lenses, and the things like the WACP can be used with crop sensor cameras. I've used it a bit with the Nikon kit lens, the 1855, again with the zoom gear, and in actual fact the results are pretty good with a what's not a terribly exciting lens, and so you know you can still use these. Obviously, the advantages I would say are not as significant as they are as we would experience with a full frame camera. So I wouldn't rush out and buy a WACP with a crop sensor camera. But if you have one, it's a good option, and it, you know, again creatively gives you a few different things that you can do with it that you couldn't do with a dome port and lens combination. And I think, Alex, you said you'd use the RS. Is that right?
Yeah, I've never shot the WACP one on a crop sensor camera, but actually you remind me that my friend Jarrett Brown, who I dive with quite a lot, he bought the 18 to 55 so that he can borrow my WACP one. So yeah, so
that's what you need.
I've got the lens. Your WACP one and the port extension, and I have to say he absolutely loves it.
Yeah.
So I've never tried it, but he really loves it on that system. Yeah, I've used the again. I don't recommend buying this, but I've used the Nikonos RS 13mm fisheye on crop sensor, and I've only used it once, but I used it all the time when I was using it. When I was shooting last time, I went and shot white sharks in Guadalupe out of the cages, and the full fisheye is often a little bit too wide for the sharks, how close they come, and everything. And because it's quite dark there, you want to be able to shoot at a relatively wide aperture to help your strobes carry out to these big animals that, although they're coming very close, are not coming super close in underwater photography terms. And being able to shoot with a water contact lens, open the aperture. I think I remember shooting like 6.7 and things like that, and getting perfect image quality and loads of light on the subject in really bright conditions, and shooting there on into the afternoon when it gets quite dark and everyone else is like, oh, the light's gone, I'm giving up for the day, and you can suddenly have the cage to yourself. You still got sharks coming in and you can get really nice shots. So I really like that on that trip. And also when you're shooting out of a cage, the smaller your camera rig, the better it is for getting in and out through the holes in the cage and everything. And I really liked that system when I shot with it. So yeah, but I don't recommend spending all the money on a Nikonos 13mm to use on a crop sensor camera. But if you have both formats, it does actually work, and it's quite nice to use.
Great. I think that's lots of great information there. I think the nice thing about crop sensor cameras is that the lens choices are somewhat simpler, so that's not a bad thing. So we'll wave goodbye to Alex. Cheers, Alex. Thank you very much. I'd just like to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is Gulen Divers Norway. Please feel free to add suggestions for topics in the comments below, likes, or subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.